Okay, today's daf is Lamed Zayin. We're going to start at the very top of the page, which is actually the middle of a Braita. The Braita started yesterday discussing the vidui, the confession that's recited by the Kohen Gadol over the bull that he has to bring. Where it says v'chiper ba'ado v'ad beto, and it's not talking about the actual slaughtering of the korban, but it's talking about the vidui that he would recite over the korban. So we're in the middle of that Braita, but it's a new subject in the Braita on the top of Lamed Zayin. Uminayin sheba'ana. So how do we know that when he says this vidui, he says Anna, right? Anna Hashem. Chatati, aviti, pashati, right? That's what he says. Please Hashem. So what is please? He's not asking for anything. When he says Anna kaper, if he says please kaperna lachataim, forgive, so we understand Anna means please. But what does Anna chatati, aviti, pashati? Where do we get the idea that we should say Anna? Ne'emar kan kapara v'ne'emar lahadan b'chorev kapara, because it says regarding Yom Kippur kapara, atonement, and it says over regarding Egel HaZahav also atonement. Mal lehalan be'ana afkan be'ana. Just like over there, what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Ana chata ha'am hazeh chata'a gedola v'asu lahem Elohei zahav. That's what Moshe Rabbeinu says. Ana. When he describes the sin, not just when he asks for forgiveness, but when he describes the sin, he says Ana chata ha'am hazeh chata'a gedola. So to here, when we describe the sins, we say Ana, Afkan be'ana. Uminayin shebashem. How do we know that he says it with the name of God? In other words, why do we say Ana Hashem? Because with Moshe Rabbeinu, it just says Ana, Chata ha'am hazeh. It doesn't say Ana Hashem. So how do we know it should be Ana Hashem? Ne'emar kan kapara v'ne'emar be'egla arufa kapara, because it says here kapara, atonement, and it says with the egla arufa. Egla arufa is the decapitated calf. When we find a homicide has been committed and we don't know who did it, in between two cities, so we find the closest city and the elders of that city have to come and they decapitate a calf. Egla arufa. And it says that that's a kapara. So malahalan b'shem, afkan b'shem. Over there with the egla, it says kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padita Hashem. Okay, atone for the people that you have redeemed Hashem. It says the name Hashem. So too over here with the kapara afkan b'shem, it should say here Anna Hashem. So we incorporate the name Hashem into the recognition of the sin. Right. That's Egla Arufa. So Amar Abai says, now we understand why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say Anna Hashem, because Egla Arufa happened after the sin of the golden calf. The mitzvah wasn't given yet. When Moshe Rabbeinu was praying to God for the sin of the golden calf, and he said Anna chata ha'am hazeh chata'a gedola, the Egla Arufa had not been given yet. So of course he couldn't learn from Egla Arufa. He didn't have the ability to do that. Ela Egla Arufa telef mechorev. But why, when the mitzvah of Egla Arufa was given, which is already in Sefer Devarim, and we already had all of the halachot, we already had the concept of Egla Arufa, so we could have inferred, we already had the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf, so we should have been able to infer from the sin of the golden calf to Egla Arufa. In other words, when Hashem gives the mitzvah to Moshe Rabbeinu of Egla Arufa, why doesn't it say Anna? Since Moshe Rabbeinu already said Anna at Chet Egel, so we should say Anna for Egla Arufa. Why not? Answer. So the Gemara first says, maybe you're going to tell me that we do say Anna, but we learned in the Mishnah, HaKohanim omrim kaper la'amacha Yisrael, vilu ba'ana lo ka'amar. So the Gemara says that no, the Mishnah says when it describes Egla Arufa, when it describes the decapitated calf, it says exactly what the line should be that the Kohanim say, and the exact line is Kaper la'amacha shabadita Hashem. It doesn't say Anna. So we do not say Anna. So why didn't the Torah use the same concept of Moshe Rabbeinu of Anna for the Egla Arufa? We're learning from Moshe Rabbeinu to the Yom Kippurim. Why doesn't the Torah use the principle, say Anna with Egla Arufa? Because we're learning for Yom Kippur from Egla Arufa and from Chet Egel, from the sin of the golden calf. Why doesn't the Torah itself be consistent and say Anna for Egla Arufa, for the decapitated calf? It's a good question, right? It makes you wonder, are we doing the right thing by learning it out? But the Gemara ends with Kashya. It's a difficulty. We don't know the answer, but we do know that this is how we do it. In other words, when it says Kashya, it means we don't know the reason. why the Torah doesn't use Anna for Egla Arufa. We're not sure why, but we do know that we learn from both Egla Arufa and from the sin of the golden calf to determine our language for Yom Kippurim. Now the Gemara says, Vehen Onin Acharav, we're commenting on the Mishnah further. The Mishnah says, as we know from the Avodat Yom Kippurim that we say on Yom Kippur itself, that when the Kohen would say the name Hashem, when he would say the Vidui, and he would say Anna Hashem, what would everyone do? They would fall on their face and say, Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam V'ayed, as we know. So, the Gemara quotes a Braita, Tanya, Rabbi says, Kishem Hashem Ekra, Havu Godel Eloheinu. What's the source that when they hear the name of God, they should fall on their face and say, Baruch Shem Kivod? Where do they get that from? Because it says, in Hazinu, when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the people, he says, when I call out in the name of God, Kishem Hashem Ekra, Havu Godel Eloheinu, you should give greatness to God, to our God. So what does that mean? When you hear the name of God pronounced, meaning the Shema Miforash, when you hear the special name of Hashem, the secret name of Hashem, so to speak, pronounced, you should render greatness unto God. So therefore, we don't just listen, we have to do something to show our recognition of the greatness of God, and that's the source for saying Baruch Shem Kivod, instead of just listening. Hananya ben Achi Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Hananya, the nephew of Rabbi Yoshua, said, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. It says in Mishlei that the remembrance of a tzaddik is for a blessing. In other words, if you hear a tzaddik mentioned, you should bless him. So Amar Lehem Navi Yisrael, the prophet, here it's talking about Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei, says to the Jewish people, V'shashani maskir tzaddik olamim. When I mention tzaddik olamim, the righteous one of the world. In other words, it's not just talking about a human tzaddik, but Hashem is also called tzaddik. Atem tenu baracha. You should give a blessing. In other words, if I'm going to mention a human tzaddik, if it says about a human tzaddik, zecher tzaddik lebracha, if you mention a tzaddik, you should say a blessing. You should bless him. Certainly, if I mention the name of Hashem, who's the ultimate tzaddik, so to speak, the source of all righteousness, we should also bless him. And that's the idea. And that's also where we get the idea of saying Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. When we hear a blessing, we hear bracha, Baruch Ata Hashem, Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Where does it come from? It comes from here. When you hear the name of God, say Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo, just like they used to say Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto. Now, we come to the next Mishnah, which is continuing the Seder Avodah. The first step of the Avodah was he did the Vidui on the par. He did the confession over his bull. Now, Balo leMizracha Azara. Now he comes to the eastern side of the courtyard, Litzvon HaMizbeach, to the north of the Mizbeach. Has Segan mi'imino, v'rosh bet av misemolo. The assistant Kohen Gadol was to his right, and the Rosh Bet Av was to his left. The Rosh Bet Av means whatever. We know that every week there was a different Bet Av. There was a different family of Kohanim who were supposed to be taking care of the service for that week. Yom Kippur day was obviously an exception because only the Kohen Gadol could serve that day. So whoever imagine you came up, Maurice, your family was supposed to be the Bet Av for that day. That day of Yom Kippur, but you get bumped. Why do you get bumped? Because Yom Kippur, only the Kohen Gadol can do it. So at least they gave kavod to the family that was supposed to serve that day by making the Rosh Bet Av, whoever is the head of that family, would walk next to the Kohen Gadol for part of the service, so they gave some kavod to that family. They didn't completely lose out. Okay, so he would be to the left. Visham Shnei Sa'irim, there they had the two goats, V'kalpi Haitasham, and there was a little box. Uva Shnei Goralot Shel Eshkeroa, and there were two goralot, two lots, two like cards made of wood, a type of wood. Eshkeroa is a type of wood. V'shel Eshkeroa Hayum. V'asan Ben Gamla Shel Zahav, and Ben Gamla, a later Kohen Gadol, made it into which is supposed to say Yoshua ben Gamla according to Rashi on the side, made them gold. They were originally of wood, then they became of gold. They said about him positive things. They said that this was a shevach for him, that he changed it from wood to gold. It was an upgrade. Now that's the end of the discussion for now. In other words, now it's going to interject with some other things that people upgraded in the Beit HaMikdash. So this was an upgrade that was done. They used to have these two pieces of wood. One said La'azazel, one said La'Shem Chatat, and they made him, Yoshua ben Gamla, when he became the Kohen Gadol, said, why are we using wood? Throw this out. We're going to get gold instead. So then they started using gold pieces for that, inscribed with the same words. Now Ben Katin, another Kohen that we read about before, was also a Kohen Gadol. Asa Yud Bet Dad Likior Shelo Hayalo El Shenayim, because originally there were only two spigots, there were only two faucets that you could wash your hands and feet. One was for the hands, one was for the feet. Most likely, right? although we're going to see that wasn't exactly how it worked. They used the top one in the morning and the lower one in the evening, but they had an upper and a lower faucet. Okay? What Ben Katin did was he said, let's make 12. Why? Because the Korban Tamid requires 12 Kohanim. It actually requires 13, but the one who does Shechita doesn't have to wash his hands and feet. So they need 12 Kohanim to wash their hands and feet for the Korban Tamid, as we already learned. So what should we do? We're going to have a long line at the washing station if we do it this way, right? We're going to be waiting a while. So instead, what did Ben Katin do? He put 12 stations in there, so they have 12 faucets, and everybody can wash at the same time. It saves time, it's very economical, and people are not standing around. And also, Ve'afu asa muchni lakior. He also made a wheel for the kior. The kior was the water that they would wash their hands from, right? So what happens is that any water that's drawn and that's in a vessel in the Bet HaMikdash, if it stays overnight, it's nifsal belina. It becomes invalidated from being left overnight.
Why? Because the weak, the zrimite.
It has to be reconnected to the natural source, right? Anything that you take into a vessel has a deadline. It has a deadline, right? It's like, you have certain things like that even in, in our experience. Something, once you open the package, now it's a deadline, right? Now you have to refrigerate it. So the same concept in a way. Okay, once you pour water, they would draw the water for the kior. Once you have the water in a vessel, once it's in a vessel, it has a deadline, 1 day only. So what he did was he made a wheel. What did the wheel do? It lowered the kior back into running into the stream of water. So it was underground. So it was contiguous with the water. It would be like you lowered it back into the well. So since it's lowered back into the well, so to speak, that means that it's not considered drawn water and it doesn't become pasul. Otherwise, when you come in the morning, you're going to have to dump all the water from yesterday and refill. This way, you lower it with a wheel. Because the water is connected to a natural source, it can't become pasul. And then you draw it up again with the wheel in the morning and you can use the water again. So it's a beautiful system. So that the water wouldn't become invalidated. Munbaz HaMelech. Munbaz the king, who was one of the Chashmonaim, according to Rashi, one of the So it says, he took all of the kelim that they would use on Yom Kippur and he made the handles of gold. Helene imo. Helene was his mother, and she's also mentioned in a few places in Shas. She's mentioned also in Masechet Sukkah about the large sukkah she had for all of her children. They were religious, they were royalty, but they were very observant. Asitan nivreshet shel zahav al petach hechal. She made a fancy menorah, decorative menorah of gold on the over the hechal. The hechal, remember, when you walk from east to west in the Beit HaMikdash, you go from the azara, from the courtyard, then you hit the mizbeach, then after the mizbeach is what's called the ulam, the antechamber, and after that is the hechal. Okay, so when you come to the ulam is the antechamber. Oh, they have a picture? Yeah. So when you come up to the antechamber, there would be this menorah over it, okay, and that itself was the entrance which went into the hechal. So we're going to see for a second why we had this menorah in a second. But anyway, another thing that Helenia Malka did was she made a golden tablet upon which Parashat Sotah was written. What's Parashat Sotah? When the Sotah comes, they have to take a parchment, a cloth, and write the words of the klala that the Kohen gives her, yes, and then they have to erase it into the water, and she drinks it, right? But they have to first write it out. So normally, what would they do? They would have to bring a Sefer Torah and copy it from there. But they didn't want to bring a Sefer Torah every time. So what did she do? She made a golden tablet there that they could copy from there onto the scroll, and then the scroll would be erased, and then they would drink, and then the woman would drink. So she did that. Now, if you were thinking of trying to get people to donate something for the Beit HaMikdash, imagine trying to sell this one, right? A golden tablet for the Sotah. Nobody wants to be. It's considered something negative, but everything that you do, it's still a mitzvah. So Nikanor naasu nisim d'lidal totav. As we're going to learn, Nikanor, miracles were done with his doors, and they were also mentioned for praise. We're going to see more about that in tomorrow's daf, actually. Now the Gemara says, it says in the Mishnah that where would they go to do the lot, to draw the lots, to determine which sa'ir is going to be Lashem, and which sa'ir is going to be La'azazel, right? When they did that to the north of the Mizbeach. Miklal the Mizbeach lav b'tzafon ka'eh. The implication is that the Mizbeach itself is not in the north. Because you're saying you have to stand to the north of the Mizbeach. We know we're on the east side. Why are we on the east side? Before we were on the west side. Because we wanted to be closer to the Heichal, because that's where this Korban is going to go. But now we're on the east side. Why? Because one of these two Seirim is going to go to out. Al-Azazel, it's going to go out. So we stay on the east side. But you could stand next to the Mizbeach. If the Mizbeach is partially in the north, you should be able to stand to the side of it, right? The fact that it says, no, you have to be to the north of the Mizbeach means that the Mizbeach itself is not in the north. Because you have to be to the north of it. So the Gemara asks that Mani, who is responsible for this? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi, Detanya, Tzafona lefnei Hashem, she'etzafon kulo panui, divrei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. This, as it says in the Braita, when it talks about bringing korbanot, it says it has to be brought tzafona lefnei Hashem, to the north before Hashem. And what does that mean? It means she'etzafon kulo panui. That means that the whole north is empty. In other words, the Mizbeach doesn't enter into the north. If you were to draw a line, the Mizbeach would be completely to the south of the Azara. If you were to draw a line in the midpoint, it would be completely to the south, not to the north. That's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says. He says that north in the Azara means north of the Mizbeach. Okay, because the Azara is completely situated in the south. V'haresha Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimoni. But the beginning of the Mishnah, meaning the previous Mishnah, we learned in yesterday's daf. For those who were following, or maybe it was actually 2 dapim ago. When was it? It was yesterday's daf that the previous Mishnah followed Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon said that the Mizbeach is partially in the north. It's not completely in the south. It's partially in the north. So you could stand, let's say this is the Mizbeach. You could stand to the northwest of the Mizbeach, to the side of the Mizbeach, and you're still in the north. You're still to the north. If you draw a midpoint, the equator, so to speak, right? The midpoint of the Azara, and you stood to the side of the left side of the Mizbeach, to the north of it, but you're still on the side of it, you could still be in the north, because part of the Mizbeach is to the north, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Shimon. Now you're telling me that no, we're following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that the whole Mizbeach is in the south. So which one is it? Gemara answers, no. Kula Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. It's all Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. V'tane utni, and teach instead beben ha'ulam v'lamizbeach. That what would happen is, in other words, in the previous Mishnah, what was the problem? In the previous Mishnah, it sounded like the person was standing next to the Mizbeach. Okay, they were standing to the left of the Mizbeach, and yet they were still considered to be in the north. That can't be true according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, because according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, any time you're standing to the side of the Mizbeach, you have to be in the south, because the whole thing is in the south. You have to be past the Mizbeach to the north in order to be to the north. Because it's entirely, imagine this is the edge of the Mizbeach, this is all south. You have to be at least a step past it to be in the north. You can't be here. You can't be here. But according to the new understanding that we're following Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, it should say, Kiven ha'ulam v'lam mizbeach. You're like between the ulam and the mizbeach. Meaning to say, really, you're to the north. You're not next to the side of the mizbeach. You're really to the north, but you're right by the corner. You're right past the mizbeach. You're to the corner. Okay, so that's why you're considered to be in the north. And you had to be between the ulam and the mizbeach, which means you're actually to the west of the mizbeach slightly. Okay? And you're to the north of the Mizbeach slightly. So you're like at the corner of it, but you're not to the side of it. Because if you were to the side of it, actually between the side of the Mizbeach and the Ulam, you would be to the south, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So you have to be a little bit to the north. That's the way that the Gemara concludes. Now we get back to our Mishnah, Hasagan b'mino v'rosh bet av bismolo. That it says that the assistant Kohen would be to the right, and the head of the bet av of that day would be to the left. Now, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Hamalech liyamin rabo harei zebur. It says that somebody who walks to the right side of their Rav, their teacher, is a bur. He has no class. Rashi says he doesn't even have derech eretz. Okay? So how could it be that the Sagan, the assistant Kohen, would walk to the right of the Kohen Gadol? It's not respectful. The Kohen Gadol is the big cheese. Right? He shouldn't be walking right next to him. Tanan, it says in the Mishnah, Hasagan b'mino v'rosh bet av b'smolo, and yet it says that the assistant Kohen is walking to the right. Ve'od Tanya, and we furthermore learned, Shlosha shayum halechin b'derech harav be'emtza gadol b'mino v'katan b'smolo. And moreover, it says in the Braita that if 3 people are walking on the way, in other words, a rabbi and 2 students, the Rav walks in the middle, the greater student walks to the right, and the lesser student walks to the left. V'chein matinu b'shlosha malachei hasharet shebahu etzel Avraham, Michael ba'emtza, Gavriel b'mino, v'Rafael b'smolo. That when the 3 angels came to visit Avraham Avinu. The middle one was Michael. He was the greatest one. Gavriel was to the right, and Raphael was to the left. In other words, we see that being to the right or left is okay. Our Mishnah shows that being to the right or left is okay. The story about Avraham Avinu says that being to the right or left is okay. The halacha about walking with your Rav says that being to the right or left is okay. So how can Rav Yehuda say that somebody who walks to the right of his teacher is a fool? How could that be? The answer is Targuma Rav Shmuel Bar Papa Kamed Rav Ada. Rav Shmuel Bar Papa explained this before Rav Ada. Kedeshi Yitkasebo Rabo. It means so as to cover. So that his teacher is covered. That his teacher is covered by him. What does that mean? Rashi explains. It doesn't mean, Rashi says, that you walk right next to him. It means to the right of him and behind him. Okay? In other words, when it says to the right, it means to the right and behind him. Not next to him. Because next to him is not kavod. The Gemara asks, but wait a second. Didn't we learn in another Braita? It says somebody who walks right next to his teacher is a bur, he's a fool. Or somebody who has no class, really. Behind his teacher, this is arrogant. How can you allow your teacher to go forward and you don't accompany him? You're letting him walk in front of you like you don't care. You're not escorting him. So what are we going to do? So the answer is the mitzadid atzdudeh, that when does it say you can't walk behind your teacher? You can't let him walk far ahead of you because then you're not escorting him. You have to walk close to him, but you don't walk right next to him, which shows equality. You walk a little bit behind and to the side of him, so that you're flanking him. We would say, right? You're flanking him. So he's standing here. You're right. You're a little bit behind and to the right. You're a little bit behind and to the left. Okay? Not all the way far behind, because then you're not escorting him anymore. Not in front of him, certainly. Not right next to him. Okay? But a little bit behind and to the side. That's the respectful way. Like if you see, if the president walks or anybody important walks, he has like two people to the side of him, let's say, an important person will walk with two people to the side. They don't stand right next to him, a little bit behind him, but to the sides. That's considered kavod. Now the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, and we're going back. That they had a box that had the two lots in them, and what happened? Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, that Aharon should place on the two goats goralot lots. Goralot shel kol davar. They can be made of anything. In other words, they don't have to be made of any particular substance. It said in the Mishnah that they were made of wood and later of gold, but it's not necessary that they be made of any specific substance. What?
What's goralot?
Goralot are they had like little, like these pieces. One of them said on it, for the lottery, it's like pulling the raffle. So the goralot...
It's what's inside the box.
It's what's inside the box. The kalpi is the box, and inside are two like tickets, that they would pull out, but they were made of wood. So, maybe you will think that two have to go on each one. Rashi explains, maybe it means that you have to put on each one of them goralot. In other words, there are two for each. The answer is no. Where was it? Talmud lomar goral echad Hashem vegoral echad Azazel. That's why it says one goral for Hashem and one goral for Azazel. Okay, there's only one for each. En kan Hashem el goral echad, ve'en kan Azazel el echad. There's only one for each. In other words, there's not two for Hashem and two for Azazel, and we put the goral on one. In other words, we have a set for each sa'ir. We don't have a set of two for each sa'ir. We have only one set of tickets. Okay, fine. But maybe, even though you don't have two sets of tickets of pieces, you have one Lashem Chatat and one La'azazel, but you put both of them on each goat. Because it says to put al shenehas seirim goralot. You should put on each one, on both of them, goralot. So maybe you have to put both tickets on both. And Rashi asks or implies the question, if you do that, how do you know which one's supposed to be Lashem and which one's supposed to be La'azazel? If you put both tickets on both, so then what kind of lottery is that? He says, and then you choose whichever one you want. Right? In other words, maybe it's just you have to put the tickets on both, and then you choose which one you want to be Lashem, which one La'azazel.
You only draw once.
You only draw once.
Yeah.
Right, so it wouldn't even be drawing, because you would take the two of them, put it on this one, okay, this one, and then put it on this one, and then say, okay, which one do you want to bring? It would just be a ritual. It wouldn't connect to imken. So then the Gemara says, Talmud Lomar, the Torah says, Goral echad lashem, en kan lashem ela echad, en kan lazazel ela echad. There's only one for each. Imken matam lomar goralot. So if that's the case, that you really only put, in other words, how it really works is you draw the ticket once. You draw with your right hand, let's say, over the one to your right, and whatever it says is for this sa'ir. You put it on that sa'ir. Then you draw the other one, and whatever it says, you put it on that sa'ir.
Do you have to do that? I mean,
that's what you do.
The other one is,
Right, I'm saying, but that's, this describing it. Really, it's by implication, you know which one is which now, right? But the point is, you don't take them both out and put them on this one, and then put them on the other one, and then say whichever one we want we're going to send to Hashem, and whichever one we want we're going to send to Azazel. It doesn't work like that. So then why does it say goralot, shiu shavin, that they should be equal? So it's mentioned in the plural, not because two are placed on each of the sa'irim. Really, each sa'ir only gets one in the end. One is assigned Lashem Chatat, one is assigned La'azazel. So why does it say goralot? Shiu shavin, that they should be the same. Shelo yaseh echad shel zahav, echad shel kesef, echad gadol, echad katan. That they should be equal. So you shouldn't make like, we'll make the one that says Lashem Chatat out of gold, because that's for Hashem. And the one that's for Azazel, we'll make it out of wood, we'll make it out of something lower. No, you should make them exactly equal. So, Goralot shel kol davar. The goralot can be made of anything. The Braita said, "Pshita, this is obvious. Lo tzricha lekidetani. It's needed for what's learned in a Braita. Lefisha matinu batzit she'Hashem katuv alav v'hu shel zav." Because it says in a Braita, you might think that just like the tzitz, the headband of the Kohen Gadol, because it says Lashem, Kodesh Lashem, it's made of gold. Afzeh, again, that the same thing should be here. We're going to write. What are we writing on this piece of wood? We're writing Lashem Chatat. So just like Kodesh Lashem, it should be gold. Just like the Kohen Gadol's forehead, it says Lashem, Kodesh Lashem, and it's gold. Maybe it should have to be gold. The answer is Talmud Lomar, Goral, Riba. Okay? So from the fact that it says Goral twice, it means it includes everything. Riba shel zayit, riba shel egoz. It could be of olive wood. It could be of egoz. It could be of any kind of nut tree. Riba shel eshkroa. It could be of the eshkroa, which is berosh, which is a type of wood that's mentioned in the beroshim. It's mentioned always in the Tanakh. So the point is that it could be any kind of wood, because it says goral, meaning it could be anything. It doesn't have to be of a specific material. Ben katin asa shene masar dad lakior. So the ben katin made for the kior, for the sink, 12 faucets. Tana, we learned in a Braita, Kedeshu Shnei Masar Echava Kohanim Ahasukin Betamid Meqaddeshin Yedehen V'Raglehen Bevat Achat. We already explained that in the Mishnah, but this is where the explanation comes from. That the reason was so that the 12 Kohanim who were going to be involved in the Korban Tamid could wash their hands and feet at the same time, so they didn't have to wait online. Tana, it was taught in a Braita. Now this is going back, it would seem, to the old way, when they only had 2 faucets. How did it work? Shacharit b'milu'o meqadeshin yadav v'raglav min ha'elyon. When the kior was full at the beginning of the day, he would wash his hands and feet from the upper faucet. However, v'arvit b'yiridato meqadesh yadav v'raglav min ha'tachton. But in the evening, when the water had already been used by so many kohanim, what happens? The water's lower. Imagine a tank of water. Right? So when the tank is full, you can take from the top spout, because there's enough water pressure, it will come out. But by the time the water's lower, the top spout doesn't have any water up there anymore. So what did he have to do? From the bottom spout. At the end of the day, he would use the bottom spout. But of course, when Ben Katin revolutionized it, and he made 12.
Alternate between Amidav, Yom Kippur, and Tamid.
Yeah, they're showing both. Yeah. That's true. This is talking about all the time. He made this wheel for the kior to lower the water into the running water during the nighttime, so it didn't become pasul. So my mukhni, what does mukhni mean? Amar Abaye gilgala. It means a wheel that would lower the water. So the tank of water would be lowered into the stream of water during the night, so that it wouldn't be nifsal balina. It wouldn't become ruined. It would be back in the underwater pit. In other words, in the well from which the water was drawn, the natural source. So that way, it didn't become pasul overnight. Now it says Munbaz HaMelech made all of the kelim, all of the handles of the kelim, gold. So na'avdinu l'didu d'zav. Why did he only make the handles? So you could say to him, "Listen, you're a wealthy man. You're a king. Why are you only making the handles gold? Why not make the whole thing gold? Why are you being cheap?" Answer, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Biyadot sakinin. We're talking about the handles of knives. Very nice to have a golden handle on your knife, but a golden blade will not work very well. It's a soft metal. It's not going to be sharp. You're not going to be able to cut well. So that's why he only made the handles out of gold. He did not make the whole thing out of gold. Metive, there is an objection. Afhu asa. It says that he also made the kaneh kelim, the bases for various kelim, the ogne kelim, and the lip around certain kelim, the lips of certain vessels, viyadot kelim, and the handles, viyadot sakinin, and the handles of the knives, shel Yom Kippurim, shel zahav. So what do you see? That since there's a list, it mentions the bases of vessels, and the lips of the vessels, and the handles of the vessels, and the handles of the knives. So obviously, handles of vessels and handles of knives are not the same thing. So if he made the handles of knives gold, it's not only the handles of knives that he made gold. He also made the handles of other kelim gold. So then the question becomes, why did he only make the handles of those vessels gold? Why not the whole thing? So again, Abaye wants to defend his position. What it's talking about is the handles of axes and sickles. In other words, any thing that Munba'az HaMelech made gold, when he made only the handles gold, it means that he made items that, were they made of gold, would not have been useful, like cutting tools. In other words, when it says that he made the handles gold, it means he made the cutting tools handles gold, because the blade can't be gold. You don't make a blade out of gold. So, but otherwise the question, of course, would be, why didn't he make, let's say, the entire bowl gold? Why would he make it only the lip of it gold? So the answer is that it's only talking about cutting tools. Any cutting tools that require a sharp blade, he made only the handles gold.
Kior itself was Nechoshet, right?
Yeah. Kior Nechoshet says in the Torah. Imo asatan nivreshet shel zahav. So why did his mother make this menorah of gold over the Hechal? What was the purpose? Tana, they taught in a Braita, B'sha'ah she'achama zorachat, nitzotzot yotzin mimena, ve'akol yod'in she'egiz man kriyat shema. That when the sun would shine, would first rise, this golden menorah would reflect the light. It would sparkle, it would reflect the light, and people would know, it's time to say kriyat shema, time to say the shema. Meitive, there is an objection. Hakoreh et shema shacharit im anshe mishmar ve'anshe ma'amad lo yatza. It says in the Braita that one who reads the Shema in the morning with the Anshe Mishmar, with the Kohanim who are working, or with the Anshe Ma'amad. The Anshe Ma'amad were the Yisraelim who would come. They always had an appointed group of Kohanim. We know that there were 24 Mishmarot, that they would come up to the Beit HaMikdash to serve. Okay? And they would serve for their respective weeks. So, corresponding to those 24 Mishmarot of Kohanim, we learned many times in the Talmud that there were also groups of Yisraelim who would come to represent the Jewish people at the Korban. They would come attend the Korbanot. They had special tefillot. They fasted every day, right? And they would read the Torah every day, and they would be there to attend the Korbanot. So it says, don't read the Shema at the time the Anshe Mishmar, at the time the Kohanim read it, and don't read the Shema at the time that the Anshe Ma'amad, that the Yisraelim read it. Why not? Because the Anshe Mishmar do it too early, and the Anshe Ma'amad do it too late. Rashi explains, because the Anshe Mishmar would get up really early, even before daytime, in order to start the Avodah very early. And so the rabbi said, read it really, really early so you don't forget later, but you're going to be too busy, right? So you're going to miss it. And the Anshe Ma'amad would wait to read the Shema until after the Avodah was done. So since they were waiting until after the Avodah was done, when they read it was too late. So don't read it too early, don't read it too late. Don't read it with the Anshe Mishmar, don't read it with the Anshe Ma'amad. They're both doing it at a time that's not ideal. Now, according to the Ritva, other Mefarshim say, it doesn't mean that they actually didn't fulfill the mitzvah. It just means that the Anshe Mishmar read it earlier, b'di'avad. They read it, let's say, after Alot HaShachar, after dawn, but not close to sunrise. So it wasn't a good time. And the Anshe Ma'amad, it doesn't mean that they didn't fulfill the mitzvah. Of course, they must have fulfilled the mitzvah, but they fulfilled it later in the day. That's one interpretation. In other words, they fulfilled it at at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is not the best time to read the Shema, but but you still fulfilled the mitzvah. That's one way to read it. Another way to read the sugya is that they were exempt from the Shema. They read the Shema as a chumrah. because they don't want to forget to read they don't want to forget the idea of Shema, but really because they're involved in avodat tzibur, they're involved in this avodah, they're really exempt from saying the Shema. So right, they did Birkat Torah for sure. So maybe they they didn't really have to say the Shema, so it was only symbolic for them to do it, that they did it. So that means don't follow their example, don't read the Shema when they're reading it, because it's only a symbolic reading, it doesn't really count. But in any case, the point is that since we know that both the Anshe Mishmar and the Anshe Ma'amad are not reading the Shema at the proper time, one is reading it way too early, one is reading it late, so what do you need to know when sunrise is? Nobody's reading the Shema at sunrise, according to that. Nobody is. So for whom is the sign of the menorah? Answer is Amar Abaye Lishar Amad B'Yerushalayim. It's talking about everyone else in Jerusalem. In other words, anybody in Jerusalem in the vicinity of the Beit HaMikdash could see the reflection of light from this menorah and would know that the sun was rising and it was time to say Kriyat Shema. True, the Kohanim have already read it earlier. The Anshe Ma'amad are going to read it later. But the rest of the people in Jerusalem who want to read it on time, they need to use the symbol, they need to use the signal of the menorah's light shining to tell them when to read the Shema. Now there's a long Tosafot here on the side that there's actually somewhat of a problem with this Gemara, because if you compare it to Masechet Berachot, because we've learned before that the ideal time to read the Shema is not at sunrise, but before sunrise. Kivatikin. The best time to read the Shema is to finish Ga'al Yisrael at sunrise and start the Amidah. Not to read the Shema after the sun has come up. So there's a discussion here in the Tosafot, different ways of understanding this, that perhaps it means that for most people, one answer that Tosafot gives is that for the average person, timing the Shema exactly before sunrise was very difficult, so this signal of the sunrise was for the average person who isn't going to be able to time the Shema, but will at least do it at the earliest time after sunrise. Then there's a famous position of Rabbeinu Tam that no, really you have to wait till sunrise to read the Shema. And that the whole idea of Vatikin was starting the Shema at sunrise, not finishing it with sunrise, based on this sugya. But it's a very interesting discussion in any case. Now the next piece of the Gemara says, Ava'afi asetat tavla, she made Helenia Malka made a golden tablet that had the Parashat Sotah on it for the reading of for the copying of the scroll for the ritual of the Sotah. So Shamat Mina, what do we learn from here? Kotvin Megillah Latinok Litlamed Ba. This is a machloket that runs throughout Shas, this discussion of whether we're allowed to write the Torah parashiot. Are you allowed to write for a tinok lehitlamed ba? You want to write for him just one paragraph of the Torah on a parchment, on a scroll. Are you allowed to do that? It's a machloket. This would seem to support what position? That you can. Because what did Helenia Malka do? She wrote it on a golden tablet, just Parashat Sotah. So that means you can write a parasha by itself. So the Gemara has to see, is this really going to prove one side over the other? Amar Reish Lakish said, Mishum Rabbi Yanai, he said, no, be'alef bet. It means she wrote it alef bet. What does alef bet mean? It means that she wrote it Rashi Tevot. She didn't write, let's say, the actual words of Vayidaber Hashem. It doesn't say, it doesn't say these words. But let's say you want to write Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe, Vav for Vayidaber, Yud for Hashem, Aleph for El, Mem for Moshe. So in other words, it was just written as Rashi Tevot, just the first letters that we would figure out the words. But she didn't actually write it out, because you can't write the Torah parashiot. She wouldn't be able to do that. So she wrote it out, sort of a shorthand of what needed to be written, so that they would remember what to write. The Gemara says, wait, but but it says in a Braita that when they would write out the scroll for the Sotah, they would look at the Tavla, they would look at the tablet, and they would write what was written on the tablet. Now, if what was written on the tablet is just Rashi Tevot, it's just letters, it's not really the words that need to be written, but it's just shorthand. So how can they write what's written on the tablet? It doesn't mean that you write letter for letter what's written on the tablet, because on the tablet was only written shorthand. It was Rashi Tevot, acronyms, right? But so they didn't write that. But it means Kimma shekatuv betavla. They knew what those Rashi Tevot were symbolizing, and they wrote according to that. There is another objection. It says in another Braita that when they would write the scroll of the Sotah, they wrote exactly what was written on the Tavla. And what was written on the Tavla? So now it's saying exactly what was written there. It was written, Im shachav ish otach v'im lo shachav im satit im lo satit. In other words, it's describing exactly what was written in the klala of the Kohen Gadol. What's written in the Torah, in Parshat Naso, is these words. So what is it saying is on the tavla? The actual words of Im shachav ish otach, im lo shachav ish otach, etc. Right? So it wasn't just Rashi Tevot. It wasn't Rashi Tevot. It was actually the words. So how are we going to deflect this proof? Hatam beserugin. It means beserugin. What does Rashi say on the top of Lamed Chet Amud Aleph? Im lo shachav acharav Rashi Tevot ad sofa mikra. So what it would be like, sometimes they'll write a pasuk and they'll write, let's say you want to write a pasuk, they'll write the first three words and then they'll say v'chule or v'gomer. It doesn't write the whole thing. In other words, etc., etc. So we write the first three words, etc. First three words of the next sentence, etc. So Rashi is saying that's what they would write. The first three words, im lo shachav, and actually the Braita makes even more sense, because why does it only quote the first few words of each pasuk? Because it only had the first 4 words of the first part, right? And then said, in Rashi Tevot, the letters symbolizing the rest of the words in that sentence. Then for the next sentence, first few words, and then Rashi Tevot, or just first letters of the words. So if it says Im shachav ish otach, those 4 words would be written out. And then the rest of the words in that sentence would be written just by the letters in those words, the first letters of those words. So that way, there were a few words of each sentence to get them started. That they could write letter for letter, and then the rest of it would be like as if it said, etc., etc., with a hint as to what the words were, but not letter for letter what the words were. Okay, and that's how we avoided the problem of writing out full Pesukim, writing out a parasha separate from the Torah in this way. So we cannot prove from the way that what Heleni Hamalka did. We can't prove from the fact that she made this tablet that necessarily you're allowed to write a parasha of the Torah separately from the rest of the Torah. We can't prove it, because it could be that the way that she wrote it was just 3 words from a verse, etc. 3 words from a verse, etc. 3 words from a verse, etc. With the etc. being the Rashi Tevot of the rest of the pasuk.